Logistics operations in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu, a small district located in the northwest region in the Lai Chau province of Vietnam. This was the location of a decisive battle fought in 1954 that proved to be a logistical victory for the Viet Minh and a harrowing nightmare for the French army. The conflict in Vietnam was a war of insurgents and guerrilla warfare. It had no clear fronts or decisive battles, and there were no clear expectations about who would win it, the French or the Viet Minh. However, a decisive victory would allow the French government to negotiate from a position of power, protecting the remaining colonial interests in Southeast Asia.
الحاسم لصالح فرنسا بالتفاوض من موقف قوي بشأن حماية مصالحها الاستعمارية المتبقية في جنوب شرق آسيا. كلف الجنرال هنري نافار عام
General Henri Navarre was appointed the commander of the French forces in 1953 with a mission to achieve victory. The plan of the French High Command was to establish a strong base of operations in the hills of Vietnam, which would enable the French to protect Laos, cut the Viet Minh supply routes, strike their fortifications, and cut their lines of communication with China.
وقطع سبل اتصالاتها مع الصين. على خلاف الأوامر الفرنسية كان الهدف الرئيسي.
Contrary to the French directives, the primary objective of General Navarre was to weaken the enemy front while maintaining the main defensive positions, leaving the field open to draw the Viet Minh into a traditional battle in an attempt to reopen the supply and communication routes.
إعادة فتح خطوط الإمداد والاتصالات. كان الجنرال الفرنسي جي
The experience of French General Ji in his 1952 victory at the Battle of Nha San, in which he forced the Viet Minh to withdraw after their equipment and supplies were depleted, convinced General Navarre that a similar operation at Dien Bien Phu would follow history and would be a sure victory.
ديان بيان فو ستكون نصرا مؤكدا. بدأت العملية في المطارات العسكرية.
The operation started in the military airfields in Hanoi. Building a base deep inside enemy territory was a huge challenge for the French, because the artillery, tanks, ammunition, personnel, and supplies had to be transported solely by air to Dien Bien Phu.
جوا إلى ديان بيان فو. كانت هناك أسباب متعددة.
There were several reasons the French chose to airdrop their assets. The road from Hanoi was 440 kilometers long, exposed to enemy attacks, and also inaccessible during the monsoon season. The rate of success arriving to Dien Bien Phu was less than optimal.
ديان بيان فو أقل من مثالية. عندما لم يتلقى رئيس جمهورية فيتنام الديمقراطية هو تشي مين.
When the president of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, did not receive a response to his offers to negotiate a settlement of the war with France, he commanded the Minister of Defense, Vo Nguyen Giap, to order the destruction of Dien Bien Phu. The planning took several months. A workforce of 35,000 local workers transported artillery and some 21 tons of rice on horseback and bicycles deep into the mountains. A second Viet Minh workforce cut a 100-kilometer route through the jungle to establish a continuous supply route from China to Dien Bien Phu. Eventually, the Viet Minh surrounded Dien Bien Phu with 50,000 men positioned on points higher than the French fortifications and surrounding the French command headquarters.
حوالي 50,000 رجل في مواقع أعلى ارتفاعا من التحصينات الفرنسية، فحاصرت مقر القيادة الفرنسية.
Believing that the terrain would make it very difficult, if not impossible to accomplish, the French had gravely underestimated the Viet Minh's ability to place heavy artillery and anti-aircraft guns around Dien Bien Phu. The French were completely surprised with the Viet Minh's ability, not only to possess heavy artillery pieces, but to successfully transport them across roadless mountains to Dien Bien Phu and keep them supplied with a sufficient amount of ammunition. According to one estimate, the French artillery assets at Dien Bien Phu included 24 150mm and 4 155mm howitzers and 30 heavy mortars. Giap's Vietnamese quarters defied French logic and situated 140 field howitzers, 50 heavy mortars, 70 to 80 recoilless guns, 36 anti-aircraft guns, and 12 Soviet-made Katyusha rocket launchers. They successfully concealed them from the French reconnaissance and artillery spotters. They also possessed over 100,000 artillery shells in their forward supply base.
أكثر من 100,000 من طلقات مدفعية في قاعدة الإمداد الأمامية الخاصة بهم. في تمام الساعة
At 5 p.m. on the 13th of March, Commander Zapp ordered the battle to commence.
بدء المعركة. يمكن توظيف
The 7 principles of logistics can be used to analyze and assess the success of the Viet Minh on one side and the French failure on the other.
الاستجابة
Responsiveness, providing the right support at the right place at the right time.
البساطة
Simplicity, avoiding unnecessary complexity in preparing, planning, and conducting logistics operations.
المرونة
Flexibility, adapting logistics support to changing conditions.
الاقتصادية
Economy, employing logistics support assets effectively.
القدرة على التحقيق أو القدرة على الاقتناء.
Attainability, acquiring the minimum essential logistics support before combat operations begin.
لبدء القتال. القدرة على الإدامة.
Sustainability, providing logistics support for the duration of the operation.
وأخيراً القدرة على
And
البقاء.
survivability, ensuring that the logistics infrastructure prevails in spite of degradation and damage.
ضمنت قوات الفيت منه النجاح.
The Viet Minh ensured success by implementing the logistics principle of attainability, by making sure that all support was in place before the battle started.
تمكن الفيت منه
They mastered responsiveness and received the right support at the right place at the right time. They were ready to start combat operations.
لبدء العمليات القتالية. تم تنفيذ مبدأ
Simplicity was implemented with the use of raw manpower to stage the fight on the higher elevations.
وظفت القوات المرونة.
They demonstrated flexibility in changing tactics when necessary.
التخطيط لحماية الموارد.
Planning to protect the resources and consistently refresh supplies showed sustainability. They did all of this with great efficiency and with great economy.
من الكفاءة والاقتصادية. قال الجنرال جي بعد الحرب أن الفيت منه
As General Xi said after the end of the war, they were balanced on the edge of the rice bowl, while the French were stuck in the middle.
في إشارة إلى المرتفعات المحيطة بالمنخفض الذي كانت القوات الفرنسية داخله. بعد أيام قليلة من بداية
A few days after the waves of attack, Commander Zapp changed his tactics to use trenches and tunnels to gradually approach the French forces without exposing his forces to danger.
بدون أن يعرض قواته للخطر. كان هذا التغيير في التكتيك.
This change in tactics was successful. The Viet Minh had few casualties, were able to take portions of the base away from French control, and made the supply problem more difficult.
الفرنسيين وجعلوا مشكلة الإمداد أكثر صعوبة. في صباح يوم
On the morning of March 14th, the landing strip was attacked with a volley of 105mm shells, which disabled it within 3 days.
مما أعطل المهبط خلال 3 أيام.
بعد تدمير المهبط, with the airfield destroyed, the French army was forced to drop supplies from the air. But this also became more difficult because their aircraft were being shot down from anti-aircraft fire.
الارتفاع المفضل لإلقاء مواد الإمداد من الجو هو 762 متراً. لكن اضطر
The preferred altitude for airdrops is 762 meters, and the French were forced to drop supplies from 1,700 meters, and eventually 2,600 meters. With the increased altitude for airdrops, the accuracy was significantly decreased, causing the French to drop the supplies outside the desired zones, and they found their way into the opposition's hands. The perimeter of the French base was 50 kilometers, and the French had received only 4,000 tons out of the 63,000 tons of building materials needed to fortify their positions.
استمرت المناطق الواقعة تحت السيطرة
The areas under French control continued to shrink with the advance of the Viet Minh forces, especially after the French retreated from several fortifications. After 55 days, the French were unable to resupply the base. Even worse, they were unable to escape. On May 17th, less than 24 hours before the start of the Indochina peace talks in Geneva, Dien Bien Phu fell to the Viet Minh. While there are numerous factors in the battle reports, it is clear that Dien Bien Phu was a battle of logistics, in which the Viet Minh won a decisive victory. Of the 16,000 French troops and support personnel at Dien Bien Phu, 11,000 were captured and were marched 400 kilometers on foot to their detention centers. At the same time, Hanoi launched victory parades celebrating the success of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The principles of logistics were not followed by the French, and that contributed to their demise at Dien Bien Phu. They had no clear objective. They ignored conventional theories of warfare, and they underestimated the abilities of their adversary. Responsiveness, providing the right support at the right place at the right time. Simplicity, avoiding unnecessary complexity in preparing, planning, and conducting logistics operations. Flexibility, adapting logistics support to changing conditions. Economy, employing logistics support assets effectively. Attainability, acquiring the minimum essential logistics support before combat operations begin. Sustainability, providing logistics support for the duration of the operation. And survivability, ensuring that the logistics infrastructure prevails in spite of degradation and damage. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was distinguished for being the end of French colonization. President Ho Chi Minh arrived at the Geneva Conference with news of the French losses. At the conference, France relinquished its demands for any region in the Indo-Chinese peninsula. In the end, one of the largest military actions in Western military operations was a failure due to poor logistics planning and execution.